I never meant to walk into room 418. The numbers blurred through my tears as I searched for my grandfather in the ICU that rainy Tuesday evening. But that wrong turn, that simple mistake of reading 418 instead of 481, would alter the course of not just one life, but two. When I began singing softly to the stranger lying motionless in that hospital bed, I had no idea that within moments, her eyelids would flutter for the first time in weeks. I couldn't have known that this woman with no visitors, no flowers, and no cards would become the most important person in my world. If this story of unexpected connection and second chances touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that remind us how the universe sometimes has plans we never could have imagined. Sometimes our greatest mistakes lead us exactly where we're meant to be. My name is Ellie Winters, and until 6 months ago, I was just a 28-year-old music teacher with a predictable life. I taught piano and voice at Westlake Community College, lived in a small apartment with too many houseplants, and visited my grandfather every Sunday for dinner. He was my only remaining family. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 19, and I had no siblings. Grandpa Frank had raised me after that, postponing his retirement to make sure I could finish college. When he suffered a massive stroke, my world stopped spinning. "Ms. Winters?" The doctor's voice had been gentle but clinical. "Your grandfather is stable, but he's experienced significant brain damage. We've placed him in a medically induced coma to reduce swelling. The next 72 hours will be critical." I nodded mechanically, trying to process the information through the fog of shock. "Can I see him?" "Of course. He's in the ICU, room 481. I wandered through the hospital corridors in a daze, the antiseptic smell burning my nostrils, the fluorescent lights harsh against my tear-swollen eyes. The ICU was a maze of identical hallways, and in my distress, I took a wrong turn. When I finally found what I thought was the right room number, I pushed the door open without looking at the chart. The room was dim and quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. A woman lay in the bed, tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. Her face was pale, framed by dark hair that spread across the pillow. For a moment, I stood frozen in confusion. This wasn't my grandfather. I was about to back out when I noticed something that stopped me. There were no flowers, no cards, no personal items of any kind. Just the sterile hospital equipment and this unconscious woman who appeared to be about my age. The visitor's chair beside her bed was empty, with no sign that anyone had sat there recently. I should have left immediately. Should have apologized to the empty room and continued my search for Grandpa Frank. But something about the absolute solitude of this woman kept me rooted to the spot. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I have the wrong room." The monitors beeped steadily in response. I turned to leave but paused at the door. The emptiness of the room felt wrong, like an abandoned stage. As a music teacher, I knew the power of sound to fill empty spaces. Before I could question my actions, I turned back. "Since I'm here," I said softly, "would you mind if I sat with you for a moment?" I took the silence as permission and slipped into the visitor's chair. Up close, I could see that the woman was beautiful, with delicate features and long eyelashes that rested against her cheeks. A chart at the foot of her bed identified her as Jane Doe. She had no identification when she was brought in. According to the notes, she'd been in a coma for 3 weeks following a pedestrian accident. "I'm looking for my grandfather," I explained, though I knew she couldn't hear me. "He had a stroke. I'm scared I'm going to lose him too." My voice cracked on the last word. Talking to this unconscious stranger somehow felt safer than facing the reality waiting for me in room 481. I didn't have to be strong here. I didn't have to prepare myself for the sight of my grandfather, my rock, my only family, lying helpless and unresponsive. "I'm a music teacher," I continued, filling the silence. "My grandfather was the one who got me into music. He bought me my first piano when I was 7. Even though we didn't have much money after my parents died." The steady beeping continued, unchanging. He used to sing to me when I was little, I said. Not very well, mind you. He was terribly off-key. I smiled at the memory. But it always made me feel safe. Without thinking, I began to hum the lullaby Grandpa Frank had sung to me countless times, an old Irish melody his own mother had brought from Dublin. The humming turned to soft singing, my trained voice filling the sterile room with something warm and alive. Tuareluarelural, tuareluareli. Tuareluarelural, hush now, don't you cry. I sang the verse twice, letting the melody wrap around us both like a blanket. When I finished, I sat in silence for a moment, tears streaming down my face. I should go find him, I whispered, standing up. I hope someone comes to sit with you soon. As I turned to leave, a small sound made me freeze. I looked back at the bed. The woman's eyelids were fluttering. Nurse! I called, rushing to the door. Someone, please. I think she's waking up. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as medical staff rushed into the room, checking vitals and shining lights into the woman's eyes. I was ushered into the hallway, where I stood pressed against the wall, heart pounding. A doctor emerged from the room 15 minutes later, looking both surprised and cautiously optimistic. Are you family? He asked. No, I was in the wrong room. I was looking for my grandfather. He nodded, glancing back at the door. Well, your mistake might have been fortunate. She's showing signs of emerging from the coma. It's not uncommon for familiar stimuli, like music, to help trigger consciousness in coma patients. Will she be okay? It's too early to tell. Brain injuries are complex, and recovery is rarely straightforward. But this is a positive development. He paused. You said you were looking for your grandfather? Yes, Frank Winters. Room 481. That's on the other wing. This is room 418. He gave me directions, then added, what you did in there, sitting with her, singing, that was kind. We haven't been able to locate any family for her yet. I nodded, suddenly remembering my purpose. I should go find my grandfather. Of course. As I walked away, I couldn't help looking back at room 418. Something about that woman, alone in the world and fighting for her life, had touched me deeply. But I had my own family crisis to face. I found Grandpa Frank in room 481, looking small and vulnerable amid the medical equipment. His familiar face was slack, his strong hands motionless on the white sheets. I sat with him until visiting hours ended, talking about everyday things as if he could hear me, telling him he needed to get better because my houseplants would die without his green thumb advice. When I left the hospital that night, I was exhausted but determined to return the next day. What I didn't expect was that I would visit 2 rooms instead of 1. The next morning, I brought Grandpa Frank's favorite jazz records to play on my portable speaker. The nurses said familiar sounds might help, even in a coma. After sitting with him for 2 hours, I found myself drawn back to room 418. I hesitated outside the door, unsure if I should intrude again. But the memory of that empty room, devoid of any sign that someone cared whether this woman lived or died, propelled me forward. To my surprise, she was awake, not fully alert, but her eyes were open, staring vacantly at the ceiling. A nurse was adjusting her for. Oh, I'm sorry, I said, starting to back out. The nurse looked up. Are you the one who was singing yesterday? I nodded. Come in, she said. She's been in and out of consciousness since last night. It's a good sign, but she hasn't spoken yet. I approached the bed cautiously. The woman's eyes tracked my movement, though her expression remained blank. Hi, I said softly. I'm Ellie. I accidentally came into your room yesterday. No response, but her eyes stayed on my face. The doctor said they don't know your name yet, I continued. I hope it's okay that I came back to check on you. The nurse finished her task and patted my arm as she left. Talk to her. It helps. Left alone with the woman, I felt suddenly awkward. What do you say to a stranger who can't respond? But something about her drew me in, perhaps the vulnerability, or the solitude that mirrored my own. I visited my grandfather earlier, I said, sitting in the chair beside her bed. He's still not awake. The doctors say it could be days, or... I couldn't finish the sentence. Anyway, I thought maybe you'd like some company too. Her eyes followed me, but her face remained expressionless. Would you like me to sing again? I asked, not expecting an answer. To my astonishment, she blinked once, deliberately. Was that a yes? I asked, leaning forward. Another deliberate blink. My heart raced. Can you understand me? Blink. The nurse said you haven't spoken yet. Is it difficult to talk? Blink. I felt a surge of excitement. I'm going to get the nurse. But as I stood, her hand moved slightly on the sheet, the first voluntary movement I'd seen from her. I sat back down. Okay, I'll stay. And I'll sing for you. This time, I chose a different song, Blackbird by the Beatles, one I often taught to beginning voice students for its gentle melody. As I sang, I watched her face. Something changed in her eyes, a spark of recognition, perhaps, or emotion. When I finished, a tear slid down her cheek. I reached out instinctively and took her hand. It's going to be okay, I said, though I had no right to make such promises. Her fingers twitched against mine, not quite a squeeze, but an acknowledgement. I stayed for another hour, talking about inconsequential things, my students, my apartment, the unusually rainy spring we were having. Sometimes her eyes would close, and I thought she drifted off, but then they would open again, finding my face as if to make sure I was still there. When visiting hours ended, I promised to return the next day. As I walked to my car, I realized I'd spent as much time with this nameless woman as I had with my own grandfather. The thought brought a twinge of guilt, but also a strange sense of purpose. That night, I researched coma recovery and brain injuries, learning about the long, often difficult road that lay ahead for both my grandfather and the woman in room 418. I learned that emerging from a coma was just the first step. There could be physical impairments, memory loss, personality changes, speech difficulties. Recovery could take months or years, and some patients never fully recovered. The statistics were sobering, but they only strengthened my resolve to return to both rooms the next day. Over the next week, I fell into a routine. Mornings with Grandpa Frank, afternoons with the woman I'd begun to call Lily in my mind, after the Easter lilies that had been decorating the hospital chapel. Grandpa remained unresponsive, but I continued to talk to him, play his favorite music, and read aloud from the mystery novels he loved. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about his condition, noting improvements in his brain activity, but they couldn't say when, or if, he would wake up. Lily, meanwhile, was making remarkable progress. By the end of the week, she was able to nod or shake her head in response to questions, though she still hadn't spoken. The doctors had run tests and determined that her vocal cords were undamaged, suggesting her inability to speak was neurological rather than physical. I learned from the nurses that she had been found unconscious at the base of a hiking trail outside the city, with no identification. Her photo had been circulated to missing persons databases, but so far, no one had come forward to claim her. It's as if she appeared out of nowhere, one nurse told me. No ID, no phone, no distinguishing marks or jewelry. Just a woman in hiking clothes who fell and hit her head. The mystery of Lily's identity added to my growing fascination with her. Who was this woman? Did she have family somewhere, wondering what had happened to her? Or was she truly alone in the world? On the 8th day, as I sang Blackbird to her, it had become something of a ritual. She moved her lips, trying to form words. I stopped singing immediately. Lily? Are you trying to speak? She nodded, frustration evident in her eyes. Take your time, I encouraged. Don't force it. She took a deep breath and opened her mouth. The sound that emerged was barely audible, a raspy whisper. Not. I repeated, leaning closer. Not what? She swallowed with difficulty. Not Lily. My heart leaped. Her first words, and they were to correct the name I'd given her. Of course, I said, smiling through sudden tears. That was just what I called you in my head. What's your real name? She closed her eyes, her forehead creasing with concentration. After a long moment, her eyes opened again, filled with fear. I don't know. The doctors confirmed what those 3 whispered words suggested. Lily, or whatever her real name was, had amnesia. Her brain injury had affected the areas responsible for autobiographical memory. She knew language, recognized objects, understood how the world worked, but she had no recollection of her own identity or personal history. Will her memory come back? I asked Dr. Patel, the neurologist assigned to her case. It's possible, he said. Retrograde amnesia following traumatic brain injury can be temporary. Familiar surroundings, photographs, even smells or music can trigger memory recovery. But in some cases, the memories never fully return. So she might never know who she is. We'll continue to work with missing persons databases. Someone, somewhere, must be looking for her. But as days turned into weeks, no one came forward to identify the woman in room 418. The police had found no matching missing persons reports, no abandoned vehicles near the hiking trail, no clues to her identity. Meanwhile, her recovery continued. Physical therapy helped her regain strength in her limbs. Speech therapy addressed her halting speech, which improved daily. Cognitive tests showed her intelligence was intact, though her memory remained a blank slate before waking in the hospital. And through it all, I kept returning to her room, drawn by something I couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the way her face lit up when I entered, or how she fought to form words to communicate with me. Perhaps it was simply that, in the midst of my worry over Grandpa Frank, helping Lily gave me a sense of purpose. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after our first encounter, I arrived to find her sitting up in a chair by the window, a significant milestone in her recovery. Ellie, she said, her voice stronger now though still raspy from disuse. I was hoping you'd come. Look at you, I said, genuinely impressed. Sitting up on your own. She smiled, and the simple expression transformed her face. Physical therapy this morning. Exhausting. I pulled another chair close to hers. But worth it, right? She nodded, then looked out the window at the hospital garden below. They're releasing me soon. The news caught me off guard. That's wonderful. But where will you go? Her smile faded. Social services. They'll find placement. The clinical term hung in the air between us. Placement. As if she were an object to be stored somewhere. You still don't remember anything? I asked gently. She shook her head. Flashes. Nothing clear. Dr. Patel says, might never come back. I reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural between us. I'm sorry. Don't be, she said, squeezing my fingers. You're the reason I'm awake at all. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a bird hop along the garden path below. Then, without planning to, I heard myself say, you could stay with me. The word surprised us both. Lily turned to me, eyes wide. What? I have a spare room, I continued, the idea taking shape as I spoke. It's small, it was supposed to be a music room, but it has a futon. You could stay there while you figure things out. Ellie, you barely know me.